If you put 3 individual short films together into one full-length movie, it's gonna be a confusing mess, and Saban Entertainment, the folks that made Power Rangers, went ahead and did it anyway. Digimon the movie is messy. It's non-stop talking for an hour and a half, and the only positives people really have to say are that it's charming, the one-liners are funny, and the soundtrack is an absolute banger. But why? Is Digimon the movie a dumpster fire or a legitimately good adaptation? People generally don't think it's something to be considered authentic because it's not Japanese, like subs over dubs. Better yet, does it matter if it remains authentic? I'll tell you right now, this movie's primary goal was to appeal to the Western market, and it did so by injecting this new overarching story, energetic music, and copious amounts of humor. Despite needing to make a profit by nature of the media industry, I truly believe the creative people that made it stayed true to the spirit and personality of the Japanese short films. And by doing so, the Digimon movie became a unique time capsule into the year 2000. I'm going to break down the entirety of this wacky film, starting with the history of the American anime industry leading up to the year 2000, which I think is crucial in understanding the landscape that this movie was being adapted in, and ultimately why it's my favorite movie of all time. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, as in you're my parents or some of my friends who have no idea what Digimon is a multimedia franchise that consists of toys, TV shows, manga, video games, movies, and trading card games. Plural, there are 2. Digimon are short for digital monsters. They are beings made up of computer data that live in the digital world. The lore of the digital world changes depending on what canon you're following, like whether the world and Digimon were created the same time as computers, or if they were always kind of there and computers opened the door to this place that always existed. The Digimon franchise began as a series of virtual pet toys created by the same team that made Tamagotchi. Akiyoshi Hongo, who is credited as the series creator, is actually a combination of the names of the project's core development team. Now, there is a bit of a debate on how many people this actually is, but it at least includes Aki Maita, who came up with the original concept for Tamagotchi, Nakatsuru Katsuyoshi, who was the animation director and character designer for the first 4 seasons of the anime, and Takeichi Hongo, co-director at Wiz and formerly Bandai's chief Tamagotchi officer. Some other possibilities include Hiroshi Izawa, the author of the V-Jump manga series, and Yabunyo Tenya, the illustrator of the manga series. Season 1, Digimon Adventure, which is primarily what the short films are based on, is about 7 kids getting transported to the digital world and have to team up with Digimon to find a way back home. And with the help of a human partner, the Mon are able to digivolve into more powerful forms with the help of a Digivice and other trinkets. Around 1998 or 1999, Toei Animation was approached by Bandai to make a 20-minute short film showcasing what Digimon were ultimately meant to be. Before we go into that film, let's first examine the history of anime in America before the year 2000. In the 1960s, early anime was generally geared towards children. This ensured widespread appeal because it was simple stories that everybody could enjoy. Stuff that was based on fairy tales, folk tales, and daily life sitcom style stories. Japanese animators were also clocking the success and technical achievement of Disney over in the West. Specifically, Osamu Tezuka, who's most known for creating Astro Boy in 1963, was greatly influenced by a lot of American culture, including astronauts, movies like Pinocchio, and cartoons like Superman. His company, Mushi-Pro, would dominate early Japanese TV. He would also go on to create Kimba in 1965, and the second half of the Moomin series, a known cult classic these days, in 1969. A lot of this Japanese animation was indistinguishable from American cartoons to viewers in the US. My mom actually watched Astro Boy, Speed Racer, and Ultraman alongside cartoons like the Jetsons and the Flintstones. And all of these cartoons together really helped to show that animation was viable in the television market, unlike science fiction. Going into the 1970s, animation and sci-fi were often looked down upon, especially in America, and a lot of sci-fi was hard to produce in Japan if it wasn't seen as something that was proper. Starting his career around this time was the famed Hayao Miyazaki, who very notably prefers fantasy over science fiction, with the majority of his films predicated on a dislike of industry, technology, and the present. Other things that weren't considered proper, I mean, look at Godzilla, that is an absolutely chonky little boy. However, there were some more serious series popping up in the 1970s, despite this, sci-fi or otherwise. We have Lupin III in 1971, Devilman in 1972, and Space Battleship Yamato in 1974. All of these were dramatic and adult stories featuring well-developed characters and copious amounts of violence, because Japan didn't have any restriction around children's programming. The American adaptation of Space Battleship Yamato, Star Blazers, was heavily censored because it was basically World War II in space. They had to limit the cultural references, violence, death, and swearing to make it more palatable, I suppose, to the American audience. But things with sci-fi would really change with the Star Wars boom circa 1977. Star Wars itself was heavily inspired by the 1958 Kurosawa film The Hidden Fortress, and this really signaled a larger introduction of East Asian culture to the United States. We have other famous Kurosawa films like Rashomon and the Seven Samurai. We also have Kenji Fukusaku coming out with Battle Without Honor and Humanity, and we also have Bruce Lee films coming out of Hong Kong. Some culture was as simple as food, cars, and musical instruments, and a lot of this stuff had no clear cultural values like religion or nationalism, and the stuff that did could really just be compared to existing American tropes, like cowboys to samurai, mafia to yakuza, and boxing to kung fu if you squint. By the 1980s, it seemed that animation was really starting to get the hang of it, and so was the media industry. Animation on TV was widely considered for children by this point, getting stuck in the animation age ghetto. Toy tie-ins began to explode thanks to the loosening of the US television code, which officially ran from 1952 to 1983, which prohibited the use of profanity, drunkenness, and addiction, among with other things, as well as including advertising. As previously mentioned, a lot of more mature anime was being heavily censored because of this rules, and some non-mature ones as well. Astro Boy actually had a lot more violence and featured multi-episode plot lines, which American producers felt would not succeed over in the West. And all of this goes to show that there was really no precedent on how best to adapt, market, Japanese media to Western audiences. I would say the best example is the adaptation of Macross into Robotech in 1985. Arguably, and in my opinion, the most influential anime in America at all. Robotech was 3 different shows put together, that is absolutely true, but each one was sort of following each other like a season, so the audience didn't have to keep up with this huge cast of characters for an entire show. So a lot of people give Robotech flack for smashing these shows together and kind of being that first one to truly do that, but it wasn't as egregious as a lot of people say. Series producer Carl Macek reported receiving death threats for the butchery that had been made to the original show.
And they wanted a program that would be completely unlike anything that had been on television for animation in the past. And with those rules, and with the help of a lot of people at Harmony Gold and in Japan, we came up with Robotech.
And people really jump on this guy so hard. There's a TV trope describing similar levels of editing known as a massacre, which is kind of hypocritical considering Voltron in 1984 was also massacred. But one of these shows would get a Netflix series and the other is stuck in licensing hell. Just kidding, just kidding. I mean, it's mainly on Harmony Gold because Macek would actually go and leave Harmony Gold to start Streamline Pictures, a company whose primary goal was to bring anime to the US with no cuts, keeping editing intact and original music present. And they did this, though results may vary. Any Akira dub would be hard to make because the animation was done after recording the voice lines in the original Japanese production, so It's not my favorite dub. I prefer the one with Joshua Seth for obvious reasons, but I can understand where they're coming from with having a really hard time with this one. Their dub of Castle of Cagliostro as well actually faced copyright issues with the Maurice LeBlanc estate, which is also understandable of a problem to deal with. 21st century thinking has proven that not only could Western audiences understand Eastern cultural complexities, but that they wanted to. This is where Saban Entertainment comes in. They're definitely not as infamous as 4Kids, but they're not really great either. It was founded in 1980 as a music production company by now media mogul Haim Saban, whose origin story is the most fake-it-till-you-make-it thing that I have ever heard. There's this really wild story where he's trying to find a band to play in this really crappy club, so he's just going around asking everybody that he knows, and eventually someone says, "Yeah, I hear music out of this apartment building sometimes, you should check it out." And this guy waits for 3 whole days for the music to start playing again, and he starts knocking on people's doors trying to find who is in this band. And wouldn't you know it, it's this band called the Lions of Judah. Not Judah and the Lion, no. A pretty cool, like, kind of psych rock-ish band. And he would go on to be their fake bass player because he didn't actually know how to play much bass. So at some point he puts his arm in a fake cast so he can, not have to play, because there were stipulations that he had to be in the band that he said that he had. So he got away with it by just turning the amp off or pretending to have a broken arm. It's the wildest shit I've ever heard. But Saban would eventually become their manager and a music promoter as well, but then he almost went bankrupt, which kind of tracks for the music industry, and would move to Paris in 1975. At some point around here, he was still managing some other artists, but he meets this guy, this legend, Shuki Levy, and they both moved to Los Angeles together in 1983. Now, Saban discovered this huge loophole when it came to music copyright. There were basically separate royalty licenses for cartoons and the music in the cartoons. So basically, the animation would be under one copyright license, meanwhile, the music would be under another. And Saban realized, hey, wait a minute, some of this music is not that difficult to produce. What if I start asking to retain the rights to these music licenses? And that's what he did. He would go around to different animation studios offering to make all of their music for them for free as long as they could retain copyright. Saban and Levy would go on to make some of the most popular 80s cartoon themes ever, like X-Men, Inspector Gadget, He-Man and She-Ra, and, Heathcliff, I guess. I'm not really sure on the exact amount of music that Saban actually made as compared to Shuki Levy, but let's just say some of the songs that are under both of their names do not all sound the same. They are not all made the same. And this is where we get into Power Rangers. If you know the story, Saban went around to different media studios, probably for anywhere from 6 to 8 years. I keep seeing different numbers, trying to pitch this show called Bioman. And eventually Fox would take a chance on it in 1993 and rename it Power Rangers. If you don't know, Power Rangers is an adaptation of the Japanese series Super Sentai. And Power Rangers did so well that it really doesn't need much further discussion. But it is worth mentioning that Super Sentai was produced by Toei, the same studio that created Digimon. And the toys were created by Bandai, who would make the Digimon toys in the first place. You can't talk about Saban Entertainment without talking about the SAG disputes. Saban basically lived in hot water with SAG because of Power Rangers. Ever since it came out, complaints of child actors being incredibly underpaid. The story of the original Red, Black, and Yellow Rangers is one of those known quantities, which is why they ended up getting replaced about halfway through the series. And there would eventually be a massive boycott and huge consequences if you were a SAG actor caught working with Saban. It's safe to speculate that Saban was all union after this massive boycott based on the cast list. And another dispute would crop up when Digimon the movie started production. It was pretty obvious that it was going to be this completely new product, and based on that, there should be residuals for actors because it's not just a simple dub. There were no further articles kind of mentioned that it even existed, so something was probably negotiated negotiated between the two parties. YouTuber Botluck Productions actually emailed SAG trying to get a little bit more information about this dispute, and they didn't get any response. And now that Discotek Media has announced their plans to not only re-release the movie on Blu-ray, but redub the original Japanese films, it's kind of a moot point. I am pretty sad this means I can't watch the movie on YouTube in 480p anymore, though. But this announcement was huge. I had to re-record this section because this took me so off guard, but I am hype. Saban would go on to achieve his first $1 billion in 1995 thanks to Power Rangers. It's kind of crazy to think that in just 20 years he went from basically bankrupt to media tycoon, major funder of the Democratic Party, and a close friend of the President of the United States. Just wild to me how little time this took. Like, this man is a money-making machine. Going into the 1990s, it was truly better times all around. Thanks to faster production cycles, the trend of actively localizing Japanese media to better suit American tastes begins. In part due to the consumer electronics boom, there was all this new and accessible technology coming out. Computers with production software like DAWs and graphics editors, email, which made it super easy to collaborate over any distance, as well as VCRs, which became so much cheaper to produce and buy. Back in the 70s, some of these cost over $1,000. All of this technology would completely change our relationship with media as a whole and really start the push for on-demand content that we now see satisfied with streaming culture these days. And VHS tapes were crucial to sharing early anime in the US. Shows would often get canceled without warning or were only available in major cities, California or Hawaii. And a lot of people would start to record episodes, and anime clubs would make copies for people. Fans would write episode synopses, transcripts, fan subs, and dubs, just so they can get anime out there. Without this advanced technology, it's really possible that anime would have never found its ways into America, and certainly have never established a foothold. People in America were already getting bored of American media, and at the same exact time, massive franchises specifically aimed towards children began popping up both in Japan and America, obviously complete with toys. We have Sailor Moon in 1992, Yu-Gi-Oh! In 1998, Pokemon also in 1998, and Digimon in 1999. Now we can do some educated storytelling here. Saban probably struck a deal with Toei and Bandai directly. Considering there was only a 5-month difference between the release of the first season in Japan and the first season in America, the airing schedules were so close together it left little time for rewrites and editing, and the American adaptation of Digimon was actually inadvertently faithful to the original. Which leads us into the year 2000, where our story takes place. By then, Japanese intellectuals were proclaiming Japanese products had become indispensable to American daily life, and they were kind of right.
Cell phones, pagers, PlayStation 1 and 2. You might think it was the Japanese who were responsible, but anyone in the know knows that it was Bibble for shizzle and all by Bibble, because only Bibble can keep it so real.
This dependence was really what created the Y2K scare, because tech became super advanced super fast. Just to explain a little bit about Y2K if you don't really remember what it is, programmers took this coding shortcut by getting rid of the first 2 digits of the year because storage cost so much back then. Most computers like phones, electronic banking, mass transit, and power plants, everything was really using this trick to save space. Probably not nuclear weapon systems, but you can't really say for sure, you know. At least in America, it's been seen time and time again, there's this distrust when the general public becomes faced with new and complicated things. Only about half of American households had a computer going into the new millennium, and Japan had only just launched mobile internet the year before. People were scared of what could happen and the true price of tech convenience. But despite fear-mongering, the turn of the century brought about this huge sense of excitement about the future, though the pre-9/11 naivety bubble would pop, but not before Digimon the movie would come out. The movie project began about a month and a half earlier than the series, in February or March of 1998, and the creative team didn't really have much to work with character-wise. There were the Bandai virtual pet games, there was also the V-Jump manga project, Come On Digimon, and V-Tamer, All the monster designs were done by Kenji Watanabe, who drew inspiration from the American comic Spawn, as well as from artists like Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy. But eventually, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, who was one of the character designers for Dragon Ball, did these atypical, cool, retro character designs for the show. Some people even called him a substitute Akira Toriyama for how good he was at copying that initial style of Dragon Ball. I've actually always thought that Ty's goggles were really reminiscent of old school basketball players like Horace Grant and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but that is not at all correct. It was actually based on pilot goggles, but let me have my things, let me have them. Ultimately, they set the movie in a different timeline to avoid contradictions with the show. The characters from the series weren't in the original storyboards, but the producer Hiromi Seki would suggest their inclusion to create a link to the series, which I thought was pretty smart on her part. The original concept was a bit of a spin-off of the V-Jump manga series, so Taichi's dad was going to be the main character, and they would set this movie during the third decade of the Showa era, the late 1950s to the 1960s, which would be a similar era that classic kaiju movies took place in, but specifically during the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. Unfortunately, Toei said to the director, hey man, you can't make a kaiju movie in 20 minutes, and Mamoru Hosoda went ahead and said, okay, bet. Mamoru Hosoda is arguably one of the biggest directors in anime in recent years, and it just seems with every single movie that he makes, his popularity just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But before movies like A Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Wolf Children, and Mirai, Mamoru Hosoda actually started out as a key animator. He became inspired to work in animation by Miyazaki's Lupin film Castle of Cagliostro, and was even approached to work on Howl's Moving Castle, but ended up either getting fired or leaving the project. Sources may vary. But in various interviews, he always mentions that he has a number of Western influences that inspired him. Hollywood classics, European cinema, Billy Wilder, Woody Allen's Annie Hall and Midnight in Paris, and recent movies like Birdman, Revenant, and Gravity. Hosoda would make his directorial debut with Digimon Adventure, and he originally meant for it to be a slapstick comedy where the Digimon would make a complete mess of Tokyo. There's actually a really fun story in the Digimon movie book where he was on this mission to get monjayaki, which is a type of Japanese batter pancake, while he was out doing scouting, but he realized the time constraints on the movie necessitated this to be in a single place, so he picked an apartment complex, specifically the one closest to Toei headquarters. For the reasons of the movie, he set it there because it would include lots of children. They would automatically be framed and placed as part of the audience, they would get this view from above, almost like they were in a coliseum or a fighting ring. But the kids were going to share the secret of waking up together and seeing this group of monsters fighting, and it made them special. Mamoru Hosoda really specifically wanted to focus on depicting this unrealistic thing in a realistic way. At its core, it's a film about children meeting Digimon, like a meet cute until things, actually get serious. He took inspiration from this from the Spanish film Spirit of the Beehive from 1973, which is about two sisters and one's fascination with Frankenstein's monster. The movie wanted to focus on this contrast between the child who grows up and the one who doesn't. And we see in Digimon Adventure 99 that Tai is already taking care of Hikari by himself, making breakfast for her and trying to protect her because she still sits in a high chair and talks with a whistle. Hosoda really wanted to make it clear that Digimon weren't just pets or companions. Evolution in itself wouldn't really serve a purpose without showing a Digimon's different sides. They're not good or evil, they act out of self-preservation. Koromon just goes from being a soot sprite to taking dumps, to shooting fireballs, to taking names, all in the span of 20 minutes, and Tai really didn't completely accept Digimon until the end when he started to admire them for this violence. But Hikari started to be scared of them for the same exact reason, and that is the dichotomy that Hosoda was really trying to capture. And the penultimate moment when it captures this flip of this dynamic is when Tai uses the whistle. It represents him fully accepting this point of view that he used to reject.
I thought that if I could depict that kind of inversion, I could make this a film, even if it's only 20 minutes long.
Mamoru Hosoda. The VHS opens with a synopsis of a series that was definitely needed, going through our main characters as well as the concept of what Digimon are. And then there's the Angela Anaconda thing, which I absolutely refuse to talk about, to even speculate on why this Canadian cartoon had a promo for Digimon that ended up at the beginning of the film. It took up 4 minutes, 4 whole fucking minutes of this movie, and those 4 minutes, it wouldn't have saved the story. It wouldn't have saved, like, necessarily anything. It might have made the third movie make even a lick more sense, but, like, there were only 2 kids in this world, the ones who wanted a Digimon and the ones who wanted to be a Digimon. And finally, when we get into the actual opening of the movie, we come upon this incredible gem of a piece of music known as the Digi-Rap. Now, somewhere on the internet, I'm not sure where it even originated, I tried to find more research, but somebody with the name Josh DeBear was, like, listed as being MCP Pod, but I couldn't find exactly where this was besides one website just kind of having it, and it didn't really indicate who added that information. But there is another song credited under his name for the Blue Crush soundtrack. I don't even know what this movie is, but the song Big Love by the band Chicken, it actually sounds incredibly like MCP Pod's voice, so I'm a little bit inclined to agree. It kind of maddens me that I don't know the answer to this, because I feel like y'all on the internet have been slacking and not really asking the right questions, but, like, whatever. I really don't want to go over the adaptation of the first movie, let alone the whole movie at all. I just feel like a proper media analysis doesn't need 30 minutes of summary of what's going on in the movie. I'll do it where it's relevant, but in general, the first movie, since we already talked about it, it's pretty faithful to the original, minus the Kari narration and talk of Willis as a character. The lack of Taichi's dad was really because he was a drunk and came home drunk and started banging on the children's door, which I'm kind of glad they cut this one out. I don't think it really added to the movie as a whole. And as a kid, I just assumed he worked a lot and just wasn't really present, especially based on the second part where they kind of talk about how, oh, we can't move my dad's stuff, like this is his computer, yada yada. So I think it's kind of a good change that they decided to cut this very small portion of this movie out. The changes to the score also created a cohesive tie between all 3 parts of the movie, and while it is very Hollywood-esque, like very classical, heroic, and epic, I just really don't feel like Ravel's Bolero would have translated as well culturally. It is a pretty famous piece of music, but it's very repetitive and it's very not super great for trying to convey a story that is really drastically changing that much. And I believe truly that the change in tone is just absolutely obvious from this point onwards.
You know, we really shouldn't be playing in the street.
Did you see that?
No, I was sleeping.
But you're driving!
Our War Game is undoubtedly the movie that holds up the best. It's got a really neatly packaged story. The Digidestined are on summer vacation after the events of the first season, and one of them sees this Digi-Egg become infected with a computer virus and just start going aggro. It starts eating computer data from all over the internet, messing with daily life, and digivolving incredibly quickly. It's up to the only kids that are still at home or near a computer that's rare enough to find in those days to beat it and save the day. Most of the Digimon Adventure kids are busy doing whatever motivates them or relaxing, and they're just not really present in the story. So by the end, it's only Tai, Mad, Izzy, and TK who are even available to fight this monster. And it really shows that one of the true battles is actually like being able to gather your group of people after, you know, real life sort of sets in, and not everybody can be physically present to save the world, and it's just kind of a fact of life. It was originally meant to be about the Y2K problem, but it was simplified to make it timeless, and obviously this worked. We're still talking about the movie today and not really talking about Y2K. Diaboromon is more natural disaster than evil, not unlike a digital kaiju, which is a really good follow-up to the first movie. The title is also directly inspired by War Games from 1983, a movie in which Matthew Broderick plays Ferris Bueller, except if he were an elite hacker who could hack into a government supercomputer via the telephone line and end up playing a game with it and then almost accidentally launching the world into nuclear war. You know, casual things that just happen on a Tuesday afternoon. I actually really like War Games. It's one of my favorite movies. The countdown at the end was also inspired by an American film, Speed, from 1994, where Keanu Reeves tries to stop a bus that has been rigged with a bomb that will explode if it goes under 50 miles an hour.
It's unfinished, just like Speed. Oh no!
We're right behind you, Captain.
Oh my God!
They saw us.
But the timer in the movie isn't exactly 10 minutes long, which is so aggravating. I sat there with a timer. For the most part, it lines up, but it ends up being like a minute off at some point, and it just felt like a waste of time to sit there and do that, but I had to let you all know. In addition to a neatly packaged story, the film has such colorful animation, and it's like an incredibly unique depiction of the internet, especially for the year 2000. The first film was actually traditionally cell animated, and not only can you tell from some behind-the-scenes video of the second movie being painted on computers, but you can also tell from these shadows on the actual cells itself. They leave like a very distinct mark, and it's just really cool to see early CGI featured. It does look super low res even when it is in HD, but it's still such a cool thing to kind of depict the internet in this way using computer-generated images. And Hosoda points out that he really wanted this film to be comedic. He wanted it to be comedy from an objective point of view. Like, the whole situation itself is something that's silly, and he does this through really exaggerated facial expressions, movements, and gestures. Like, he really uses poopy potty jokes in this one, just like the first one, but at the same time, the things that they're struggling with are super funny themselves, like too many emails, having to play phone tag with voicemail, school, Mimi's postcard from Hawaii that just shows up because the mom happened to remember it, and the blue screen of death. Like, it's all objectively really mundane but funny things. It's that same type of idea of depicting realistic things in an unrealistic way, and it's like the end of the world when you find out that Mimi isn't able to come over because she's on vacation with her parents. And the final punchline with the missile hitting the river was this sigh of relief after the serious turn this movie took. Like, there's no way that that would have happened in the way that it did, and I love the way that he does humor. It is really subtle and really deliberate with his choices, and it's not quite like American humor, but this type of nonverbal humor really transcends language in a way that not a lot of people seem to talk about, especially when it comes to dubbing anime. If all of those things that I just mentioned were as funny to you as they seem to me, then is the dub a freaking joy to sit through and watch. And it's all thanks to the two main writers, Jeff Nimoy and Bob Buchholz. Now, Jeff Nimoy, who is the second cousin once removed, I believe, of Leonard Nimoy, he started out his career by competing in rap competitions and being involved in some improv groups. The majority of Jeff Nimoy's career has been in anime voice acting, directing, and producing, though he has worked on a dub parody show called Chimp Limps Theater. Now, Bob Buchholz has mostly worked as an English language director, but I'm not actually sure what that means. He also worked on Chimp Limps Theater, which is where he met Nimoy, and he also worked on another dubbed parody show called Mad Movies with the LA Connection, which is a pretty okay abridged classic movie series. I actually really find it enjoyable. All of their episodes are pretty much available on YouTube because the guy that leads the troupe LA Connection just still seems to be uploading it. Buchholz is also known for some of his voice acting roles, most notably Gene Starwin from Outlaw Star, and he also has done some voice directing and script adaptation primarily for the first few seasons of Digimon. But as I made clear, using the comedy from pre-existing footage was the writer's main area of expertise, and this is exactly what they did with the Digimon movie. They inserted humor that was topical for 2000s America, like health food nuts have only gained more power in the past 22 years, and making Ty's mom this like insanely bad cook who was doing all these like wild recipes like spinach cookies and jerky shakes. Like, it's just such a good joke made off of like one thing where Izzy ended up having to run to the bathroom because he just drank too much oolong tea, which is pretty funny, but making it because of her recipes adds this new layer to her character that just wasn't there before. She was just in the background. Another addition that they add to something that's already there is every single phone joke.
Didn't you hear me?
What?
It's busy!
I'm sorry, lady.
There are also a few other jokes that I just find pretty funny in their own right based on the delivery, but they do have things to say about what it was like in 2000s America.
The uplink's working. We're back online.
Now let's exterminate that bug!
He left the phone company. Now where is he?
Look! He sent another email. I'm close to him. Close to who?
He's in America.
He doesn't even have a green card.
And like I mentioned a bit earlier, characters that aren't really present get some character added to them. Like Joe's huge thing with wanting to go to summer school, Mimi being very vapid.
Leave a very short message after the beep.
Mimi. That girl loves to talk.
And not even just Mrs. Kamiya being a bad cook, but the fact that Izzy indulges her in these things. That is a whole little extra layer to his character that in the originals may have just been because he wanted to be polite and help out Ty's mom. But now he actually really likes her recipes, despite them being bad. In addition to jokes, I think there are actually a lot of good localization decisions that they made for the film. Not much changes regarding the story between the Japanese and the English ones, aside from connecting the concept of a digi-egg in the computers to the first short film, and adding in the character of Willis from the third. Diaboromon, who was previously a non-existent threat that paralleled Y2K and nukes, now gets new voice lines. He gets a goal, he gets motivations, and now he's outright malicious as a villain, when before he just kind of seemed like this tee-hee kind of weird spider thing that was really creepy, but not as creepy now that he's not like, I'm doing this on purpose and I'm going to obliterate you. My absolute favorite are these two shots that almost mimic each other, both from the second part and the first part.
Or Greymon.
Ty, I can't move.
Ugh, it's so good. Sometimes this movie just does everything right. It lines up the music, it lines up the exact emotional feeling, it just does everything right. And then it goes and ruins it. It always ruins it.
Part War Greymon. Part Metal Garurumon. They digivolve together to become
Omnimon! Transcendent Sword!
Hurry!
It's been 1 week since you looked at me, cocked your head aside and said I'm angry. 5 days since.
Now, the reason that I translate it as hurricane touchdown and not hurricane landing is because that's how I saw it once, and, you know, I'm an American and I'm just gonna do what I want, so touchdown it is. This film was directed by Shigeyasu Yamauchi, who is a highly skilled episode director and storyboarder. Yamauchi was actually a mentor to Kunihiko Ikuhara, the creator of Revolutionary Girl Utena, as well as Mamoru Hosoda during his time at Toei. Some of his main work includes directing episodes of Ojamajo Doremi, as well as Dragon Ball Z. And in terms of large series that he's done, he's directed Boys Over Flowers, as well as some early Saint Seiya films. Yamauchi has this very distinct visual style. It is so apparent in a lot of the work that he does. It all includes deep color contrast, very expressive close-ups. A lot of the camera angles convey abstract themes like feeling small and lost, and it's almost like a horror media level of presentation in how drastic some of these decisions are. And it really tracks for him to direct this movie based on its story and themes as well, because it's not quite dark like Digimon Tamers would kind of take it to be dark, but Kokomon goes and commits property damage, and he decides to really bring some existential dread to the series that it was there, but it wasn't there, you know? He also tackles the theme of what it means to make mistakes, as well as accepting that the past is well and truly over and it's time to move on. I would say that Hurricane Touchdown has a pretty basic story. It's not super far off in the adaptation, where Wallace's Digimon gets infected with the virus and it starts kidnapping some of the original Digidestined to try and find Wallace as a kid again. The 02 gang comes together to fight Kokomon, and it digivolves and no one knows what to do. And then there's Digi-Eggs, and they really just said, how about we digivolve to our mega forms and see if that helps? And, you know, why don't you just go ahead and throw the whole marimba section of the Tel Aviv Symphony Orchestra at him vitamin C if that helps too. It doesn't make sense, even in the original, even as much as people try to pretend that it does. In addition to the almost lackadaisical way of telling a story, this movie has a very eclectic soundtrack, and I don't mean that in the same way that I would say that the American movie has a soundtrack like that, but this one is full of really odd electronic jazz fusion and Americana and folk music, and I don't really know quite what to make of it. It makes the movie even slower when you have a slow, almost walking through the motions kind of track that you have over a fight scene. Like, who would put jazz fusion over a fight scene? It just feels so odd, and it makes me feel like I'm watching a movie that's really just a dream at the end of the day. And maybe that was the purpose of it, to make it feel almost like a dreamlike state. It fits in with Yamauchi's style. It fits in with the backgrounds. It fits in with the almost vacation-like atmosphere that this movie is going for. And it's not what I would have chosen for the movie. But then again, if you've listened to any of the soundtrack going through this video, you know the kind of things that I would have chosen for the movie. The adaptation of this film is certainly not awesome, but, you know, I think it's better. Like, in the American version, it's actually Willis's fault that a virus was let out to infect both this egg and one of his twin Digimon. You can tell it's running on Humes the whole way through to the All-Star Dance montage, but it actually fixed a lot of things that I think really add to the story and cut down on that long hour-and-a-half track time. Like, listen, we don't even know what happens to the older kids at the end of the original film. They do not tell us. There is no shot to indicate that they get to go back home to where they come from. This is such a plot hole. It drives me absolutely crazy to see so many people say that this is such a huge deal and they took this out of the movie and it really changed it and it made it worse. And no, it didn't. It made it better. I'm telling you, it made it better. Like, the only point of this plot point, the only service it gives to the story is to provide them motivation to even go to Colorado in the first place, and it's such a loose motivation. Like, it's almost as loose as what they ended up doing by saying, hey, there's just a new kid with a Digimon. Like, they've gone to different countries in season 0 too. Like, oh my god, I'm sorry, I am ranting for way longer than I thought I was going to rant, but this point about the third film drives me crazy, especially when people use it as a negative. I think that it's such a positive that they removed it. It was superfluous. You didn't need it, especially with the direction they were trying to go in with having to add this movie on in the first place. But I can admit that there are things that it didn't fix. Like, the pacing is at a breakneck speed. It's just nonstop. The whole movie really is nonstop from start to finish, but especially the third part, it just, you think it's over and it's not. At the same time, any actual comedy just seemingly feels like it's done by accident. It's not really funny on purpose. Like, Davis in general is an absolute hilarity to watch. His delivery is so genuine, and that's all to do with his voice actor Brian Donovan just being a really genuine type of guy. I love his delivery of Davis. It's so good. The flame broiled or grilled line, I think, is actually a dig on McDonald's versus Burger King, which I only realize that now as I'm sitting here recording it, not necessarily thinking back on it that hard, but like, that's not funny. It's just not funny. I will say this line takes me out every single time I watch it.
This is my fault. Why? Are you the one who taught him to juggle?
No, you clown!
Good morning.
Digimon the movie's whole soundtrack was generally praised for its eclectic choice of 2000s pop, alt-rock, ska punk, and hip-hop. It was not unheard of for American theatrical releases to change the music so drastically. The American release of Ghost in the Shell actually had an original song, which was a collaboration between U2 and Brian Eno. There was even a Saban Entertainment dub show called Macron 1, which would cover pop songs during some of its fight scenes. Pokemon 2000 actually featured a lot of American music on its soundtracks, like The Power of One, which was an original song for the movie by Donna Summer, Pokemon by Weird Al, which, alright. It's actually pretty wild to think about how much pull Warner Brothers had on their own right. For the Digimon movie, more music was thrown in an effort to appeal to a wider audience, and this is where they took some risks. Of course, they included licensed music from popular artists at the time, most notably the Vans Warped Tour lineup, Less Than Jake, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and Bare Naked Ladies, as well as including stuff that was just at the top of the charts or really big hits on the radio at the time. Fatboy Slim was inescapable in the year 2000, and it was going to be on that soundtrack whether anybody made the decision to put him on it or not. It's a little bit weird of a choice, but I can understand listening to this Fatboy Slim album and thinking, I don't really know what other song has that type of energy that we're looking for, and maybe the title is a little bit inappropriate, but let's just go ahead and think that no one really knows what this song is about, and as long as it's not Fatboy Slim is fucking in heaven, I mean, perfect for a kid's movie, am I right? Smash Mouth was actually really hesitant to license any of their music for film, and frontman Steve Harwell said, "We'd been approached for multiple movies that were supposed to be the hot shit, and they fucking fizzled out. They were all just shit movies." And it's pretty well known these days that there are only 5 movies that ever licensed out the song All-Star: Inspector Gadget, Mystery Men, Digimon the Movie, Rat Race, and the most famous Shrek from 2001. The Canadian band Len was approached to cover Kim Wilde's 1981 hit Kids in America, which is also ironic considering this is yet another Canadian tie to Saban Entertainment that doesn't really have an explanation or any real reason of why this happened and why Kids in America. I mean, I really like their sound, so I'm not upset. I love this cover. It's absolutely incredible end music, but this kind of sunk their music career. Like, I found an article that said that they were really hoping to use this push from the movie to get another record deal or to get a little bit more traction so they can finish up their second album in the studio, and they have never released another album after You Can't Stop the Bum Rush. It is so disappointing. But the soundtrack got filled in with some great originals by 2 other composers that were approached to create tracks, Paul Gordon and Jason Radford. Paul Gordon was primarily a TV composer. He had done the themes and some other music for Power Rangers in Space and Power Rangers Turbo. Towards the end of his career, he ended up doing mainly touring with bands like the New Radicals and the B-52s. Jason Radford was the frontman for a 2000s nu metal band, One Sided Zero, and because of his exposure from those record label interactions, Saban Entertainment reached out about doing one song for the movie, which eventually became 3. Radford said, "It was totally out of my wheelhouse because it was for kids. They were very straightforward lyrics, but it was a lot of fun." The TLDR is that Saban and Fox really put in a lot of effort and money to make this movie sound good, and it's not just the music. Like, the sound design is so extensive, like they even add a little touch of reverb and delay while they're hanging out in the internet. They really proved that it was a legit Hollywood production. Everything is filled to the brim with sound, and it's even recorded in 5.1 audio, which basically arranges sound based on the location of what's happening on screen, kind of to mimic surround sound vibe. Japan doesn't really record TV shows like this because it's expensive. For a few years in the early 2000s, there was a huge percentage of anime DVDs that have 5.1 dub tracks, but eventually publishers would figure out that it didn't really make people want to buy a show more than they weren't gonna already. But I think that it was a nice addition. Maybe one day when I get the DVD, I can actually tell you all how it sounds, because God knows I'm not spending that much on a DVD right now. Ultimately, they just went with some interesting music. They put in a lot of effort and production costs, all to take some chances on some really eclectic and off-the-wall music. Fox was a big name, and it was a symbiotic relationship for bands to be featured on the soundtrack and kind of get traction based on these movie sales. So what happened to Digimon after Digimon the movie? Well, season 3 of Tamers would leave the adventure universe after 2 whole seasons of it, and it's not my favorite. I never claimed to have good taste, but they would go back to continue the story of the second film with Revenge of Diaboromon in 2001, which would eventually get adapted by Disney in 2005. It directly follows the story of our war game, but features the 02 kids as the main characters. It's just, I don't really like it. It's just like Evangelion flying through the air fight scenes and shit, and even though Nimoy came back to do the script, there's only one funny joke, and it's mostly played straight. I'm not really sure what to make of it.
Where are they, Anjuman? I don't see them.
Don't worry, Kari. Anjuman and I will find them.
Maybe I should have taken a left at the search engine.
I told you to stop and ask for directions. Ugh, just like a man.
I really like the art style. I like that Kenichi Joji is actually in this one, but, you know, it just is what it is. But Bandai would not be done with Digimon Adventure because in 2016, they began to release 6 films known as the Digimon Tri series, as well as releasing Last Evolution Kizuna in 2021. In my opinion, these are not bad, but they're not good. They're just not good. I only watched Tri 1 and 2 and Last Evolution Kizuna. I watched them all dubbed, by the way. Tri, was really bad. It was really bad. I just could not get past Ty and Matt's Angstfest. It was kind of insufferable, though. I will say that having almost basically every Digimon VA back and Ty, Izzy, and Mimi, it was absolutely great. It was so refreshing to hear their voices again and see them bring that character back to life in the way that I remember from 20 years ago. Kizuna felt like Summer Wars and Pokemon put together. It was weird. I enjoyed the callbacks in the opening fight animations. There were less of the original VAs, but it was mostly good. I really enjoyed who they cast for Matt in this movie, unlike Tri. However, the screenplay adaptation, which was also done by Jeff Nimoy, was actually working off of a bad translation. Thanks to this Tumblr user for pointing it out and kind of going through, but it really messed up the messaging of the film by, taking it kind of not quite literally, but just not really doing the Japanese justice, and it's just kind of unfortunate. I am really glad that he included the Polly want a cracker joke. I wish there were more jokes, but maybe I'll have to give it another watch just too, but same thing, it was just a Ty and Matt Angstfest, and I'm glad I watched it because it is over and I don't have to watch it anymore. Now, what happened to the people who worked on it? Well, Haim Saban became a billionaire, probably in part because he sold Fox Kids to Disney in 2001. Well, now, besides doing philanthropy work and being involved with the Democratic Party, he actually has gotten back into the music industry again with the Saban Music Group, as well as having his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He's still doing his thing. Shuki Levy is still doing his thing. Mamoru Hosoda has been slated as the next Miyazaki, or whatever that means. It is interesting to think that in his films he's been exploring the same thematic and visual motifs that he did in Digimon, such as with The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Summer Wars, which is basically just Digimon our war game over again, but with original characters. His newer films are focused on children and parenthood, like Wolf Children and Mirai, because he has become a father. Even as early as Digimon, he was examining those relationships between siblings and the way that we interact with the world around us. He's honestly a very internet-friendly director, and he goes out of his way to show that the goal of the internet, TV, and phones are to build communities and bridge the distance between people. Which is so anti-Miyazaki. That man hated technological change so much that he made a whole movie about environmentalism. I don't know why people call him the next Miyazaki. It's so silly. But my favorite thing that Mamoru Hosoda has done is actually this Louis Vuitton ad alongside Takashi Murakami. People were actually saying about this commercial, "Oh my god, you made Digimon in the Takashi Murakami style." And I was like, no, it's the other way around. Shigeyasu Yamauchi would take a huge break. He would go on to direct Casshern Sins in 2008, and it sort of became a cult classic, considering it was a adaptation of Casshern. And he has directed the Dream Eater Mary OVA in 2013, as well as Alice in Deadly School from 2021. And it's just good to see that he's still around. He's incredibly talented, and his art style is so unique that it would be a shame to see him completely break away from the anime industry. Bob Buchholz remains a man of mystery. He's done a lot of voice directing with The World Ends With You, Wakfu, Final Fantasy Type 0, Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3. He's also dialogue directed Violet Evergarden and its films, as well as English language directed the Devilman Crybaby adaptation. I haven't really heard anything about the quality of Violet Evergarden or Devilman Crybaby, so that makes me inclined to think that he's doing a pretty damn good job, so go Bob. And the guy of the hour, Jeff Nimoy. Now, Nimoy has said that Digimon really gave him a credibility that he didn't have before, despite having a Sports Emmy Award. He went on to voice direct Zatch Bell, Naruto, Digimon Data Squad, and the computer-generated Ultraman series in 2019. He would also do the script adaptation for Bobobo, as well as create his own film, Famish, about what it's like to be a guest at an anime convention these days. It's funny, it's a little bit cringe, but I actually really enjoyed it as somebody that goes to anime conventions, and I saw a lot of people kind of shot for shot in my own life that I've seen at these anime conventions, so I can understand wanting to make something about that experience, and ultimately I'm just glad that he's exploring those themes of what it's like to be known and cared for by people for the things that you've created.
I wish they had marketed the movie better, and I wish they would have left my first cut alone, but what's done is done, and it still didn't tarnish the fact that I had a chance to make a movie, which is a chance a lot of people in this business never get.
So I might have said I wasn't gonna talk about Angela Anaconda, but I cannot ignore the 4chan divorce post where this poor kid thinks that going to see the Digimon movie caused like a huge argument between his parents, and then they got a divorce like a couple months later. What a piece of criticism, am I right? And while we're on the subject of low-hanging fruit, let's just go ahead right now and address the comparison to Pokemon. The two have been compared since the beginning of time, before Christ, and I don't really understand it because there's no real goal to catch all the Digimon or be the very best. Like, the kids have one partner, and that partner actually speaks English or Japanese, like, they can convey language, and the digital world as a concept is separate from the real world. It's not this alternate universe where Pokemon exist and, just kind of roam around like birds. And where does the chicken come from? Do they eat meat? I don't understand. The first Pokemon movie was actually also 3 parts, 2 of whom were related and the other Pikachu's Vacation. And I'm not saying that there's not reasons to like Pokemon. It had an attainable goal, like for achievement, not necessity like survival or saving the world. Kids growing up in 90s America were probably drawn to themes of exploration and freedom. Like, they just came out of the 80s stranger danger panic and were really craving this, ability to do things, and video games were starting to give them that outlet. It was created out of bug catching and collecting, for goodness sakes. Meanwhile, Digimon focuses more on working together with different personalities to face life-threatening situations, and they still had their fears and problems back in the real world, who were influencing the kids way more through their absence than their presence. It was way more high stakes and a less idealistic view of growing up. Fighting other monsters instead of trainers also lent opportunities for world building to Digimon, like the autonomy of the Mon, like discussed about the first movie, as well as opportunities for villains like the Dark Masters, who were the final antagonists of Season 1. They are Digimon, but they're highly intelligent ones. Ultimately, I think it's kind of ridiculous to compare the first Pokemon film to the Digimon film, because understandably so, it is a cash grab. Both of them are cash grabs, and ultimately their stories have nothing to do with each other. Mewtwo as a villain is this whole thing trying to focus on, who am I? What is my identity? What is life itself? Meanwhile, Digimon the movie is just trying to, put 3 films together that have 3 ultimately different messages. I guess you can say that that's kind of what happens in the Pokemon movie. Mewtwo does destroy the lab, and then Mewtwo invites them to his island. First of all, how did he get an island? Second of all, why is he inviting trainers? Like, they never really explain it besides the fact that he hates humans, and I don't like the first Pokemon movie. I like the second one because they collect the cool little glass balls. Now to get into a little bit of general criticism about the movie. It obviously has a nonsensical story. The pacing is way too fast, and there's absolutely no time to catch a break. But the critic reviews from a lot of newspapers back in the day are absolutely scathing, to put it mildly. Lawrence Van Gelder of the New York Times says, Digimon comes off as noisy and ill-conceived. Long on morphing monsters, short on storytelling talent, and uneven in its efforts at animation. And it should be noted that the little girls in Digimon the movie are represented mainly as vacuous party animals or budding sex objects. Alright, at best, that's a little harsh. At worst, there's also something painfully ironic about a man born in 1933 being sent to watch Digimon the movie in the year 2000. Modern review sites like Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and even YouTube actually say all of those things that I said in the beginning. The positives like the soundtrack's a banger, it's an underrated masterpiece, etc., etc. And I'm really here for this push against professional criticism in recent years. I think it's awesome. Like, recognizing dumb but still liking it anyway is peak media literacy. but it kind of touches on this larger issue of what extent adults take children's media seriously. Should they be subject to the same degree of criticism as other films? Or what metrics should it be judged by? Like, adults are not the target audiences, but they are the bill payers. Is the primary goal entertainment, making money, or both? Regardless of what you or I think, George Miller, director of both Mad Max and Happy Feet, puts it best, in my opinion. Kids' movies are just like any other story. The good ones will endure and the bad ones will become invisible. Whatever you think about dubs, put it aside for a second and just think about like why they're necessary in the first place. Early on, when media started to, be able to spread internationally, the process of subtitling stuff on film was not easy at first. From intertitles to chemical stamping to laser engraving in the 1980s and then digital sometime later, some filmmakers back then put forth that film is to be watched, not read. What about the hearing impaired, illiterate, or people that just cannot read fast? Honestly, the way that people have started filming movies now that microphones work, there's a whole great video from Vox about it. I highly recommend watching it. It kind of talks about how technology is what's changing our psychology towards media. And honestly, the internet in the early days, as well as now, is an indispensable outlet for fan engagement like this very debate. There's an incredibly deep point I could make regarding anime fans and the globalizing of America, but I really just want to talk about the fun stuff. It used to be so lame to like anime that you would actively get made fun of for it. It would even take Japan until the mid-2000s to fully embrace its gross national cool. But around the late 1990s, people realized it was easier to make a website than they thought using hosting platforms like GeoCities. We got this surge of fan sites that started developing. They were like a combination info site plus blog in this era pre-Wikipedia and pre-Tumblr and pre-LiveJournal. People would put up episode synopses, transcripts, fan art, fanfic, etc., kind of like early anime clubs would provide for people. It was just online and not through the mail. I used to be all up in the Taishido Resource Center, and I remember somebody actually made a sub-edit of the second movie for these two. People were going absolutely wild, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I just love when media exists in the gap between the driver's seat and copyright infringement. But if we're going to talk about what fans have created, not just for Digimon, but for anime at all, we have to talk about fan dubs and abridged series. Some of the notable groups from these early days are Pine Salad, Studio Sokode, and Seishun Shitemasu. The quality of these may vary, but if you think about it, it's like these are the only things that people had. They would show these and people would gather around this tiny CRT TV at an anime convention just to watch some of these fan dubs. And now they've been replaced by some of their contemporaries, such as AMV Hell, which started in 2004, Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged in 2006, and Team 4-Star in 2008. And it hurts me greatly to realize how old some of these abridged series are. Some guy once said, "Nostalgia is a drug that causes us to misconstrue our memories." And every day I don't rewatch Digimon the movie is a day I believe it was better than it actually was. My original angle for this was the weight of this film, its influence, and the deeper meaning it had all along. But it didn't have those things, not necessarily. The real goal was about making it fun, cool, and profitable. And because it wanted to do that, it just laughed right in the face of authenticity, changing so much that it became a brand new film. And as Brian Ruh puts it regarding the success of old shows like Voltron and Robotech, by expanding the shows beyond the scope of the Japanese originals, the creators were able to create enduring objects. You can't deny that something about Digimon the movie has endured, despite critics of the time believing it really sucked. Saban tuned into that energy and did what worked, transforming it into something brand new. The English dub of Digimon just added something to the franchise that wasn't there before, whether it's charm or a good soundtrack or whatever you want to think that it is. But I think the real reason it endured was the fandom. It's a show about digital creatures and making friends and going through some really hard stuff at a time when the internet was still this new place, and a lot of people were going through some hard stuff, all because of the things that they enjoyed. So at the beginning, I mentioned that Digimon was my favorite movie of all time, and there are obviously my sentimental reasons for it. I have memories of seeing this movie with my Nana the year before she died, as well as I have my own original VHS tape that I had to fix recently because my VCR almost ate it. It's a movie that makes me laugh. It makes me yearn for my childhood and think harder about different things as I grow up. I think about the missed opportunities. I think about the background behind this production, and it's like a whole second film is living here underneath the surface. Its true goal was to entertain a population that had never seen anything quite like Digimon. The people who made it knew exactly where the problems were and did their best to fix this movie despite it. Mamoru Hosoda has gone on to recreate multiple scenes and storylines in his newer films, all that started from Digimon Adventure, and he puts it best.
I worked on the old ones, and I feel nostalgic for those, especially Digimon, because it was my directorial debut. That show does hold a special place in my heart. There are so many young people who are like, I saw Digimon and I loved it. I get that a lot, especially in the USA, so I'm really happy about that. Because they watched it when they were 6 or 8, and they're like 20-something now, and I'm like, you've really grown.